Good morning. This is a quick summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I know you can all read, so I won't just bother you reading all the slides. This is a little about me. I joined Capital One in the fall of 2017. Prior to that, I was at a company called Social Radar, which was a startup focused on mobility and location data and mapping information. We did a lot of process management there around collecting large volumes of map data and working with mobile and wearable apps. Prior to that, I was at a company called Blackboard. Anyone use Blackboard in college? Yes, probably hated it. I'm responsible for all of the problems that you had. I'm deeply sorry. I was young. It was a different time. Web 2.0 really hadn't been thought of. But yeah, so I had a lot of success there, and then now I'm at Capital One working on some of our case management work within our retail and direct banking operations. And working across the entire company, actually, with other teams that are doing similar things within our card and shared tech organizations. So we recently held a hackathon. Camunda is a technology that really fits well with us at the bank because we use a lot of Java, Spring-based applications. We do a lot with open source. And we have a lot of need for process management, as I'm sure a lot of folks here who are in fintech and elsewhere have, and probably why you're here. Hackathons have a lot of different meaning for people. Sometimes it's just getting like a bunch of engineers together in a room and letting them play for a couple days. I like to use a hackathon as a structured learning event where we're really trying to drive people towards building solutions with a new piece of technology and really having hands-on learning and also teaching the broader organization about what the technology is and what solutions it can deliver and how you would even deliver those solutions. So overall, we conducted this hackathon. We had 2 days for it. We brought in 6 teams. We had 42 people across those teams. We had about 70 total people involving support staff and others who were present at the hackathon. And that was a pretty good turnout for within our retail bank operation, the types of folks we were trying to reach in our target audience. In addition to developers, we also had product owners and process managers. And this was a little unusual because many hackathons are just engineers. But we really wanted to make sure that at the end of this process, we had a good collaborative model. We're trying to break down silos between people who own processes and people who actually are in development. You don't want to have it be like, well, the business says we got to do it this way, and the developer says they want to work it this way. You want to kind of build that bridging and understand how using tools like BPMN can build that collaboration. So we tried to build that collaboration into the design of the agenda of the hackathon, and then when we brought everybody together, we gave them these ground rules. And I think that's really important when you're trying to do a hackathon is set some ground rules for the people coming in so they know what it is how they're supposed to work together. Otherwise, you get people just kind of sometimes pairing off on their own thing, or they're not working collaboratively, or someone's like, well, I'm a product manager, so I think I should be able to say what our process is going to be that we're going to define today. And someone else is like, well, I'm a developer, I have no say on what our processes is. We really wanted people to have a collaborative model because that's what really works best with Camunda and BPMN and decision tables to be able to really elaborate out and understand how you even collaborate together with tools like Coemo and the modeler. And we really wanted people to have fun and just embrace the opportunity to share as well. You don't want people to lose sight of that. A hackathon should be fun. We then gave them this problem brief. And the idea here is you want to set a direction for them. Too often people come together in a hackathon, they don't know what it is they're supposed to build, or don't really build something that makes any sense to anyone. We wanted some value to come back to the organization and be able to show to the executives we were bringing in to show what these hacks were that were being built at the end of the day, that what they were building had some meaning. So we tried to give them some required elements, some things they needed to be talking about in their pitch if they were presenting it, when they were presenting it, and some of the optional things. We also did some things with the Camunda environment, deploying it in a Spring Boot container using the Spring Boot starter, but then we also built our own set of Camunda plugins to make it work better within the Capital One environment. So we did things like extend the HTTP connector, so it was very easy to connect into our web service-based endpoints that we have at the bank, so that you'd be able to get things up and running quickly. We integrated with our single sign-on solution into the task list app, so you'd be able to do that. We actually also modified the task list app to use, Capital One has an internal style sheet and design language called OneDesign that we use for all of our applications, so we went in and restyled everything in Cockpit and in the task list in particular so that it would look like a Capital One form and would have kind of a basic UI that was a little more presentable. With the idea that, some teams would be building their own custom UIs. The winning team actually did end up building their own UI. They built an interface using a chatbot, which was very interesting. But others were able to get up and running and have some value, even if they were just building forms using the task list. And we did try to say, look, use mock data if you can't get, because always some of these things take approvals to get up and running and connections to different systems. So we wanted to make sure people weren't going to let that prevent them from getting stuff done in 2 days. And then, yeah. The teams were all brought together for the hackathon, yeah. So they were all working in a room. It was about 3 times the size of this space here. We had tables. We gave people Post-it notes and stuff to work on. And the idea was they didn't necessarily have to come with an idea in mind. And then we had every team, we assigned people to teams. We didn't let them form their own teams before they got there. Yeah? They were actually just starting with it, many of them. So it was really getting them to understand what BPMN was. We did a couple webinars beforehand just to give people some context and direction about what it was, but we also did a morning training session, and I'll show you that in agenda here in a moment, where we actually just made sure everybody had some baseline of knowledge about the tool and capabilities. We tried to do things like get the developers to have the developer environment set up before they got there, but we provided time in the morning to make sure if anyone didn't have their tools set up correctly, we had some guides of people that we had sort of pre-trained to come in and help them get past those barriers. We had one team that had already built a successful pilot at Capital One, our sort of initial deployment of Camunda, and they were there as subject matter experts to be able to help those individual teams along if they got stuck and answer questions and get them through issues. The rubric's important because you want to be able to brief your judges on what they need to be looking for. You don't want it just to be like, well, I like that guy over there, so I'm going to give him a prize. When you want everyone to have a common understanding of what they're going to be judged on. And we really had this slide up pretty much the entire time for people to go reference back to. We had it on our projector, so they could always come back and say, like, all right, is our solution meeting these criteria? So then, in terms of the event and how it went, we actually tried to use kind of pseudo BPMN to describe our agenda. And also on our badges, we actually had some BPMN of just like, let's collaborate and let's build and then let's get, and let's win. And so it was kind of an interesting little, we kind of tried to reference that, sneak that in everywhere to get people thinking in terms of the different collaboration models. Here you have, your collaboration model being shown by different pools, and you have the arrows going between them, and you have the teams being divided up and interactions being described, timers to describe when things are happening. It was a fun way to do it. You see, in the morning, we had this setup period where we got people going between the breakfast and the kind of setup period. And then we got them to first do a period of the day that was really about ideation. So get them to do a structured brainstorming activity. Don't just leave them to go, all right, guys, come up with an idea. We said, look, spend 10 minutes, everyone just brainstorm. We had Post-it notes for them to write their ideas on and then put those up on a board when they were done. And really try to, as a team, decide, which ones meet the rubric that can we do that's attainable in the time, can we meet the things, picking, and then we had them each pick a top 2. There was some concern, I wasn't particularly concerned, but there were some other concerns by other people helping organize the hackathon of well, what if people come up with the same idea? We can't have 2 teams building the same thing, that just looks silly. And I'm like, I don't think that's gonna happen, but it could happen. Other people were like, what if they don't come up with an idea? And I'm like, all right, that has never happened in the history of any hackathon I've ever been to. I've been to hundreds of these things. People always come up with an idea. Yeah, you get enough, you pump them full of coffee and Red Bull, they're gonna have an idea. It may be a terrible idea, but they will have ideas. And if they don't have a good idea, you could always take it. If you have other teams come with a couple of ideas, you could always take one of those ideas and say, all right, guys, why don't you do this idea over here? That's probably better for you. But we then had them pitch it, and the pitching was to some of our senior product managers. Actually, they were pitching to their managers, essentially, and their tech leads to then get feedback on what their idea was. This wasn't part of our judging, per se. It was just to help give them some steering at the end of that brainstorming session. You don't want people coming up with an idea that's too big. You don't want them coming up with an idea that's too small. And you want them to come up with something that's going to be an exciting idea at the end that you can show. When you have the vice presidents coming in to actually look at what's been built and do the actual judging, we wanted to make sure we had good things to show. So we did that, and that worked very well. And the idea was minimum viable product, they're going to be delivering it tomorrow. So morning is about getting your idea and getting set up and configured. Then we do the elaboration phase. That's our afternoon of our first morning. And that's about really getting that BPMN document defined and trying to define what the tasks and services are. What is it I'm going to build? How am I going to get that initial understanding of the BPMN? It may not be the final one because you're going to make changes as you begin to actually build out your demo, but get them to elaborate on that and make sure they understand how to work with BPMN. We had the books provided to us by the folks for reference from the folks from Camunda, which was also very helpful. Garth, who's our client manager, helped get us a lot of material and things to get up and running. And then we had our folks checking, our subject matter experts checking in with them and answering questions. So if they had questions about how you do something in BPMN, they could kind of get past that basic stuff and giving them a lot of feedback throughout the afternoon, trying to give them feedback throughout the afternoon. Then the second day was really all about getting ready for that demo. The morning was really, we were recommending people focus on code. We did a little check-in around lunch to make sure they weren't completely behind and not going to meet their deadline. We did have one team that got pulled off to have to go work on a high priority issue. One of their live systems had problems and they had to kind of break off. So we were able to kind of accommodate them a little bit in the flexibility. And then again, we tried to sort of just keep people looking at diagrams most of the time so they understood what's going on. So let's talk a little about the planning process and how we got that agenda together and the goals and other items. For us, it was about a 4-month process. A lot of that had to do with finding the right space. For some reason, in Tyson's Corner, which is where I'm based, there's just a lot of stuff going on all the time. So finding space proved to be more challenging than we thought to get the right size venue and make sure we had time for people to become aware of the hackathon and not line up with all of our other commitments that we have, keeping the lights on. People want the bank to stay in business while we're off hacking, obviously. And we sort of broke it out into these broad areas of logistics, agenda planning, the event support, and the recruiting of people. And we brought our team together. We had 2 tech leads sharing, being able to help recruit their fellow tech leads in the teams to join. We had a couple product owners providing feedback on the goals and ideas that we were trying to deliver, as well as the structure. And then we had a couple of our scrum masters who also helped us with just general logistics and planning. So you look at these individual items now. Let me talk about some of the lessons learned in those individual items. So we wanted to really figure out with logistics, it was really about trying to maximize participant availability. Any large organization, you have code deadlines people have. We were looking to do it in the springs. We had to factor in spring holidays. We had to factor in spring break for people with kids. So we tried to find a date that would work for that would meet when we had enterprise code freezes in effect, so people weren't going to be actively doing other things, when other projects were sort of in some other phase where that would be a good time. So we worked across the org to really maximize that. We did have some trouble where some late conflicts came in, and we had to move the date by like a week as a result because something came up. So I think a lesson learned there is just you can't spend enough time trying to find those random conflicts of, oh, I was planning on throwing this big event on that same day. Is that going to affect your hackathon participation? We want to do our quarterly celebration is planned for that day. We can't have the hackathon, so it was a thing that we really tried to get out of the way early, but we did. And then venue size and budget, just finding the right space and not trying to blow our budget on an external venue was a challenge. We did end up learning that we just needed to get holds for several dates because the date had to be able to be a little, as these 2 things kind of come together, you just are going to want to do that. And then we did the food budget to really minimize that. We found that pick food that is almost like self-assembly. The taco bar was a huge success. Burritos were a big success because if you're vegetarian, you can just put the vegetarian stuff in. If you're, whereas like we had like a sandwich thing, and it was, then trying to figure out who needed what sandwiches was just kind of a nightmare to track. Pizza, also good. Snacks, go to Costco, just bring them in your fridge. It was a lot cheaper than just using credit, folks. But then I'm cheap that way. Before the event got going, we really spent a lot of time trying to train people in advance so they had enough context when they got there. And that's where we spent time on, let's get them working through their, let's do a couple of 1-hour sessions, plus we did office hours for people to make sure they got their development environments up. answered some general questions about BPMN, and made it easy for them. And assigning, we also, just to organize things, we assign people to teams because we wanted to make sure we had a balance of skills there. This is probably the biggest thing that I have seen in different hackathons I've run, is that if you let teams self-assemble, that can be a very good experience. But at the same time, you can also end up with two guys that get the short straw, or gals, and they don't have any, they don't have a web developer, so they can't get the one thing they need done. Or you have a group of people over in this corner who they don't fit in with any of the groups, and it's so we tried to make sure every team had a product manager or a process manager person. We had some UI skills, back-end skills, API skills, so we try to separate, get all those things out there so we would be able to really make sure they were all maximizing their time. And what worked really well for us was these milestones. We had the ideation, the elaboration, and then the actual build-out as mini phases within the process. And in doing that, you then check in and steer at each point. We considered having judging for each of those milestones, like, okay, let's judge the pitch, let's judge their elaboration, but we felt like that was a little overkill and just seemed like, now everything's a contest, and does it mean that if I win the first two milestones that I'm sure to win the third milestone? That could be very demoralizing for the other folks. So we thought better to just provide that steering feedback to everybody. Some people were concerned, like, oh my God, but they might steal, some team might steal another team's idea, but really, it can't be that competitive in a hackathon that's an internal company one. It's not, you don't want people being so cutthroat that they're like, aha, they stole that idea from us. Those, and honestly, that didn't happen because everybody's got their own ideas and they think their ideas are the best. That's why they're there. There is a chance, though, to say, like, oh, here's how they've solved a particular way with BPMN to do something. We should probably follow that same pattern. In terms of staffing, the one thing I did say is that we had on-site experts. That worked fairly well. We did a lot of examples up front as well of just trying to get some, as people asked questions about how do I, in advance of the thing, like, well, how do I model what does it really mean to have if I want to put an SLA on an event, what's the best way to do that? How would I add it? What kind of a timer event is that? Is it an interrupting timer? Is it I forget what the two kinds of timer exceptions are, but do you want to be interrupt, or do you want to allow the process to continue? What does that model look like? And some other things along those lines to help people understand how you just did something in Camunda and what events you would expect to see, and just what the model looked like. How to embed a script, what the process variables, how those things would all work. And really, I don't think you can have enough examples of that, particularly that are specific to your environment. The judging process with having the rubric, that did work fairly well. I would say that we really should have had, I really wish we could have had some Camunda staff on site. Unfortunately, there was a major, we learned a couple weeks before that they were going to have a major Camunda all-staff meeting at the same time we were having the hackathon, and it was that point we had moved the date 2 times, so we couldn't move it again, but that would have been helpful. And I really wish I had pushed my experts that I brought on site to really get out there and check in with every team at least once an hour, and just make sure that at least one SME just sat down with them and said, all right, so where are you guys at? Just to give them more touch and more feedback. There were a couple teams that struggled a little bit, and I think they would have really benefited from that. They didn't go and get the SMEs when they were in trouble, and they would have benefited from that if we had just had the SME go over and say, okay, where are you? Getting attendees, we didn't have that big of an event, so we just used Google Docs and Google Sheets to keep track of who was registered. I think if you're holding a bigger event, you need to think about Eventbrite or something so you can track who's registered. We did a lot of work to try to define who we wanted to participate, what specific teams even within the organization we wanted to highlight. So we didn't just want to get people from our own bank operations group. We wanted to get some folks from, Capital One also has a very large card part of the business and some shared tech resources. We wanted to get technical people in from that to participate in this same activity. So we did a lot of outward reach. We tried to make sure that we could do that. And we wanted to make sure that managers understood this event is a priority and you want to get your people there. This is really going to be a big deal. So we worked with a lot of the senior managers just to try to make it a priority for people so people weren't like, well, I got other things I might want to think about. I'm not sure I really want to go to so many people to the hackathon. Question?
How many teams did you have at the event?
We ended up breaking people into 6 teams.
And how many teams did you have?
How many teams do we have total in the organization?
No, in the hackathons.
We had 6 teams in the hackathon. That we broke
6,
people
and
into.
what was the size of each team?
7 people per team.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that may have been a little large. We probably could have gone with slightly smaller teams. But some of it was just the, like, getting the right balance of skills on a team and making sure we had a right, could fill all the gaps. It didn't have a team that was, like, short-staffed in any way. So that was really critical.
Thank you. Thank you. So one of the main ideas behind Hackathon for you guys were to get all these different development teams or developers to get familiar with Camunda, or was it more to deliver some of the functionality for business?
We wanted to get the business and the developers familiar with Camunda and familiar with how they could collaborate to build solutions with Camunda.
Okay.
We weren't expecting the solutions to be final solutions that were going to be deployed live for the bank. But they are very much the nucleus of the next set of projects that we're undertaking.
Okay.
There's a lot of, you can do a lot in 2 days. And in fact, the team that won ended up building a solution that took a chatbot and helped resolve some of the common issues around account closure and transfer. So you could, an associate could communicate with a chatbot, and then it would, in the background, go through all the different services that had to be involved and whether, an account save thing had to be triggered or other events. And then it even ended by calling the person to notify them their account was being closed to do the final check. They managed to use Twilio for that, and they actually called one of the judges during their demo, which was very cool. So that's the kind of, that made a huge impact for the head of our product management, who was there, was really just like blown away by what they were able to do in 2 days. Like that's incredible. Now it's obviously not a production ready solution, but it was impressive nonetheless to be able to talk to all those different services and get a solution that, literally called his own cell phone. That was amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Do you provide a centralized platform within Capital One, or you ask everybody to deploy their own stack?
So what we do is we have different teams in a you build it, you own it model. And so as a result, they're managing, and we give them all the DevOps infrastructure. So it's essentially turnkey for them, but they're deploying to their own ECS container and their own Postgres RDS instance that's set up to be with a region failover capability. The result of that is that, but that doesn't mean that it's one thing per. But it's really sort of team focused and operationally focused in terms of clusters of things that are going on.
So if they have their own ECS clusters that they deploy, who supports them operationally? They support themselves?
Yeah, so they have to support some level of their infrastructure themselves. We do have DevOps and other groups that are responsible for the higher level of monitoring and other requirements that they're sort of I'm trying to give a simplified answer to what is actually sort of a complicated, it's not really a complicated process, but there's a lot of Capital One specific stuff that I'm troubling to, I could spend probably a half day explaining how that all works. But essentially, we have DevOps. They give you pipelines that you have to follow that are prescriptive, that have gates your code needs to go through before deployment, and tie into tools like Splunk and Elk and New Relic and other things to provide monitoring. And there are monitoring teams that then give you alerts back to your team. But ultimately, your team is accountable for the performance and SLA of your service. So hopefully everything is very turnkey for you, and you don't need to be a DBA or a Unix admin to be able to manage it. And we have resources for that if you need that. But when you get into the overall deployment pipeline and so forth, it's you're following sort of standardized processes and templates and tools for managing those capabilities. Anything else? So hopefully you're all ready to go back to your own organizations and host a hackathon. Or you're like, no, this is an insane idea. I mean, I'll tell you, the process managers being in the room made a huge difference because their eyes lit up when they saw the modeler. Because if anything those folks love is a flowchart. When they realized they could just make a flowchart and it could turn into code, I think they were literally so excited. And they saw tools like we showed the enterprise tools and how you could, track everything. They were like, oh my God, this is what I've been waiting for. So They went from like skeptical about Camunda, because you talk about it abstractly like business process management, automation software, like that is, you might as well be speaking gibberish, right? To like, wow, it totally makes sense. I want that flow chart. I want that heat map. That was the kind of thing that was very useful for it. And then they understood by the end of it how to collaborate with developers to build that out, which is a huge win. Any other questions? None. I've left you stunned, hopefully. Thank you.